Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Setback Leadership Podcast. Well, this is a special episode. First of all, it's Dasara today. Happy Dasara to you all. And secondly, this is our 10th episode. So we had to bring in a very, very special guest. So, who we have today with us? What's your guess? Yes, our today's guest is a really multilingual, multicultural leader. He is British by birth, Australian by passport, Brazilian by wife, having clients from many countries from Singapore to the Silicon Valley. Yes, I am talking about the Andrew Bryant, a certified speaking professional who is one of the number one speakers in self-leadership and speaks about how to wake people up to their best selves. He has been working on self-leadership for more than 20 years through his books, his keynotes, his discussions, his coaching, and so on and so forth. So here we have Andrew Bryant in the show today. Interestingly, in today's conversation, we spoke about many personal aspects of his life. He in fact recently moved to Portugal and he's setting up a life there from the hustle bustle of Singapore. So what did we speak about around self-leadership? What is self-leadership and how leaders like you can imbibe self-leadership along with setback leadership to become the best version of you? You want to know? Let's hop into the conversation. Andrew, awesome to have you in Setback Leadership Podcast and great to see you finally talking to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Srijata. I'm sorry it took a while to align our schedules.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. It's great that you're already here. And I know that you recently moved from Singapore to Portugal.
Yes, I did.
Your new life there. I want to know that before even we get into the conversation.
Well, it's figuratively and literally a breath of fresh air as I, can breathe in the Atlantic ozone after a somewhat constrictive environment in Singapore over the last 18 months. Now, Singapore's been my home for 18 years. I've got a lot of great friends in Singapore. Singapore's been a great place for me to launch a global business. But it was time to get out from air conditioning and lockdowns and enjoy a bit of sunshine, walks on the beach, and at new horizons. So my life is very good right now.
Brilliant, brilliant. And we do keep seeing those pictures in your Facebook profiles. And, you keep making us envious to the life that you're leading right now. Having said that, you have earned this life, I know, for a long, long time now. And you've put in a lot of effort to become who you are today, the leading, influential leadership executive coach that you are today, and also the certified speaking professional that you are. So how did the journey come along? How did you become who you are today?
That's a great question, and I think it's a tricky one to answer from your own perspective. But I'm English by birth, Australian by passport, Singaporean by PR, Brazilian by wife. So I'm truly multicultural. And, I think it all starts with an openness to experience perspective. So, I left home at 18 to go to university. I studied physiotherapy. And at 25, I left my home country of England to move to Australia for, again, broader horizons. And by this time, I had not just qualified as a physiotherapist, I also had a background in traditional Chinese medicine. I'd studied neurolinguistic programming, neurosemantics. And this openness and experience led me to a curiosity around human potential, human performance. As a physiotherapist, I worked with athletes back in the UK. I worked with first division soccer teams. I worked with ballet companies. And I I got to see people at the cutting edge of physical and mental performance. And this was back in the 1980s, before positive psychology had been created, before sports psychology had been defined. And that curiosity has been with me forever. How can I live my best life? How can I facilitate and help other people to lead their best lives? And that has been the narrative that has driven me throughout my life and career. How can I be my best self? And how can I help others?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a very important question to ask ourselves. How can I be the best version of myself? And how can I help others lead their best version of life? I think that's a beautiful question to ask. So, Andrew, as you know, this particular show, Setback Leadership Podcast, is, and in this particular season, in fact, is we talk about the glass ceilings, the stereotypes, the challenges that are holding us back, us in the sense the leaders back from our growth, from our from our progress, and so on. So what does glass ceiling mean to you as a person?
I first came across the term glass ceiling in the 1990s when I was speaking in Australia, and it was particularly referenced to females in the banking industry, that there was this invisible barrier where women could only get promoted to a certain level. And then above that, it was all men. And so the glass ceiling was coined as this term, that a woman could only get so far. I think now that the term can be referred to both external barriers in terms of misogynism and institutionalized racism or gender bias, and also be referred to the mental barriers that we create in terms of a glass ceiling. A lot of people create a glass ceiling for themselves. For example, a demographic that I coach a lot of is Indian nationals in the US in the tech industry who get to C-2 and then think they can't go any further. And they go, well, I'm an Indian, I'm in another country. And I go, excuse me, have you looked at who runs Microsoft? Have you looked at who runs Google? Have you looked at, who? So they're mentally saying, yeah, but I'm from a small village in India. How can I be a C-level executive in a global company? I go, well, how can you not be? The road is clearly paved. So the issue is not actually one of physical barrier, but mental barrier. So when we look at glass ceiling, yes, there are barriers in certain areas in terms of institutionalized bias, but often it's mental.
Yeah. I want to ask you a follow-up question here. So you're saying it's a mental barrier. Do you think it is something that they're imagining? There is something that is probably is not even there, but they're thinking, yes, it exists, and they're stopping themselves because they think it exists.
Okay, to answer that question, let's just take a step back and look at what is the construct of a belief, right? So the glass ceiling, the barrier, the self-limiting belief, whatever you want to label it, is a belief. And what is a belief for human beings? So a belief is an idea that has been confirmed. It's an idea. So a belief isn't a reality, but it feels like a reality to whoever experienced it. So look, here's a simple example. When I was a young boy, my mother would say, eat all the food on your plate, right? And I think your audience would resonate with that. Many mothers would say this to their children, eat all the food on your plate, because the mother's intention is to feed her child, right? There's this bias, I have to be a good mother, I have to feed my children. So we get this idea, we must eat all the food on the plate. And this is when we do, and mum says, good boy, good girl, you ate all your food. So we had the idea is affirmed, it's confirmed, and this becomes a belief. Now, I remember moving to Asia in 2003. I landed in Singapore, spent a lot of time in India and Malaysia, and wherever I went, my hosts fed me, right? There's this in Asia, as we know, there's a belief about being a good host. And so food would arrive on my plate. I would eat all the food on my plate, and then more food was put on my plate. And so I would eat all that food because my belief was I had to eat all that, and they would put more food on my plate. Now, this had obvious consequences. I just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and realized the belief was no longer serving me. Now, this is a fun example, but this is a key question. What is the trigger that starts the belief? And does the belief serve you? So those people who believe that there is a glass ceiling have seen some evidence. There have been situations where men were preferenced over women, or, if you were white, it was, you were more likely to get the job than if you were of a different hue or color. So there are evidence of the glass ceiling. And then this becomes a belief or a generalization that this is everywhere and it applies to me. And they're missing the exception, which I just described, Indians who are running tech companies in the United States.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's where you're talking about. In fact, let me tell you, being a mother, even I force my daughter to eat all the food in the plate.
Now, you're not necessarily doing her any favors. When she's obese in middle age, she can blame you, right? So, whereas the Japanese, think about it from a cultural perspective. The Japanese teach their kids to eat until you're 80% full.
Yes.
Right? It's part of the Ikagagi philosophy, finding the sweet spot. Yeah. Stop when you're 80% full. And because remember, there is a delay between your stomach telling you you're full and you actually being full. And if you actually eat to the point of being full, you've already overeaten.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I'm following that for myself now that I'm realizing that my midriff is increasing without any proportion, thanks to COVID and not moving. I know you have been through the similar situation yourself, so you can relate to it. So I've started doing this now. But then, you're right. I think that, I need to tell even my daughter that eating, for example, needs to be done as long as you're full. Even if that means that there is extra food on your plate, that's fine. Just take less. You don't have to take more on the plate. And you're right about the Asian, being a good host in the Asia means giving more and more food to people. I have been a victim of it myself. I have done it to my guests as well, so I can totally vouch for that. All right, so let's move on into the into the interview, and I want to ask you this question. You're talking about that you coaching the C-suite level executives, especially many people in the US who are from India and other parts of the world. So have you ever seen a leader struggling to break a glass ceiling? And if yes, could you give us an example? And how did you help them break their glass ceilings or stereotypes?
Well, the challenge is to choose one example, because this is an area, having been a Westerner, living in Asia for 18 years prior to my recent move, this was a sweet spot. So I would help somebody who was, let's say, People's Republic of China, Chinese, somebody from Shanghai or Beijing, working for a global company, get to the C-suite. And the big issue is this concept of executive presence. And I define executive presence as the ability to project gravitas, confidence, and poise under pressure. So in Asian cultures like India, perhaps less India, more Vietnam, Thailand, moving to China and Japan, there's the concept of don't be the sound of an empty vessel, right? So an empty bowl actually makes more noise than a full bowl, right? Don't. And also alongside that is this concept of humility. I remember moving to Asia in 2003, and my friends saying, "Andrew, you're moving to Asia. You're going to have to learn to be humble." And I'm like, "Well, how arrogant do you think I am?" They said, "No, you're not arrogant. You're just confident." And I said, "Well, confidence and arrogance aren't the same thing, right? Confidence is not walking into a room thinking you're better than anybody else. That's arrogance. Confidence is walking into the room not having to compare yourself with anybody else." So a big issue working with women leaders, working with people from Asia, is how to be confident and overcome this fear. Oh my God, if I talk about myself, if I show how good I am, I'm being arrogant. And to reprogram that and say, no, turning up and being the best version of yourself is what is expected in a global community. Because as we know, our American colleagues are not shy about telling you how good they are, right? Because that is their programming, as you know, as they do show and tell through school. This is what I made. This is what I did. This is the medal I won in running this. And so they are programmed to step forwards and say, this is how good I am. Conversely, both women and globally women are asked to not step up too much. And in Asia, this concept of humility and collectivism. So in collectivism, you know, if you interview somebody for a job who's from Asia and you say, can you give me an example of when you achieved X, whatever the behavior is you're looking for? And the response will always start with, well, we did this and, and we did that. And we achieved this. And you're asking, yes, but what did you do? And the response is still, well, we did this. No, but what did you do? Yes, I understand you were on a team, but within that team, what was your individual contribution? So Westerners who are very I-orientated struggle with this we because they want to know, what are you doing? So in helping, whether it's somebody from China, India, or Thailand, to step up and be a global leader, you have to reprogram them that it is okay to say, I was faced with this challenge. These were the ideas I had. These were the actions I took, and these were the results that I got. That there is nothing wrong with saying that, because if you've done it, it's not bragging.
Yes, and that's where I think I would like to bring in a couple of experiences of mine as well as a Asian woman. And you see me, I'm not a person who is going to be calm, coy, quiet kind of a person. You've seen me. I laugh out loud. I really laugh out loud. And I've seen this happening when I was working for a big international company. I was heading their product management. And, I was told specifically by my boss and the HR that you need to tone down. You need to smile quietly. You shouldn't be laughing out so loud. And I just couldn't understand that. Why was I said that, And on the other hand, a leader that I was talking to the other some time back, he said that he was going for an interview in Amazon. And the same question was asked, what did you achieve? This certain thing in this particular project. And he kept saying, he's an Indian leader. He kept saying, we did this, my team and I together, we did this and blah, 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 blah. And the other side, the interviewer responded saying that, yes, all that is fine, but what did you do? What exactly did you do to get things done? And he was unable to understand why was he asking that question. So I think this dilemma continues this side as well as that side of the world, and it'll be there forever.
Well, and it won't. I mean, we're having this podcast right now and hopefully your listeners are looking, how can they improve their lot in life and accelerate? I mean, a huge problem here is when talent and skill and I separate talent from skill, because talent is innate, right? And skill can be learned, right? Some people are just fortunate. They won the lottery in terms of their IQ or their creativity, their DNA. They won the lottery. And skill, of course, are the things that we work to achieve, right? So moving to Portugal, I am developing the skill of speaking Portuguese. I have no talent for languages, right? My wife, who is fluent in French and Portuguese and Spanish and English, she has a talent for it. I don't have a talent for languages, but I have the intentionality and I'm developing the skill, and I have functional Portuguese. I can order food in a restaurant, right? I can go to the supermarket and I can buy the groceries in Portuguese, but I am not talented at it, but I have the skill. So I just thought I just want to separate that out. But there is a huge bank of talent and skill, regardless of gender and nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, whatever bias we have. There is this huge amount of talent that is lost if it cannot step forwards and say, this is what I'm good at, and this can be my contribution, without fear of being shot down. And that speaks to psychological safety, which, as we know from a piece of research from Google, is the key to an effective team. Now, the person that is telling you to quieten down is not feeling safe around you and making you feel not safe in that environment. So there's two parts of that, right? You just being you threatens somebody else. That speaks to their insecurity, not your sense of strength and humor and ability to articulate yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of lesson here for all the leaders. Don't change yourself for others based on what others are saying. Just change when something is not serving you. You want to be improved version of yourself, and I think that's the lesson here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew.
Well, you want to be very careful because if you give that advice, you have to do it with a caveat, right? So, my research and writing is all in the area of self-leadership. And self-leadership is going to be different in North Korea than it is going to be in North Carolina, right? So expressing yourself in North Korea, and I doubt we have many people watching from North Korea, so I think I'm safe picking on them. There are consequences to speaking up, right? And this is the challenge. So there's a belief I can't speak up, but also if there are real consequences. Now, sometimes the consequences are illusionary, right? And, it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, you would care less what other people think about you if you realized how little they did, right? We can't live our life on other people's narrative, but we still have to be sensitive to context, right? And I was on somebody else's podcast yesterday, and they asked me the question, who is my favorite leader? And as a writer and speaker on leadership, I get that question a lot. And it's a trap. I would never answer who is my favorite leader because it's contextual. You could talk about the example I would give as being English, Sir Winston Churchill. Now, the English love him as a wartime leader, but his career prior to that was a debacle. If you're an Indian, you should hate Winston Churchill because he fought Mahatma Gandhi on India's independence. If you're Australian or New Zealander, you should hate Winston Churchill because he was the architect of Gallipoli, where the Anzac soldiers went to their death. So it's contextual. And even, dare I say Gandhi, there are elements of Gandhi's leadership which are questionable, right? So everything is in context.
Yes, very, very true on that. And now that you already spilled the beans on self-leadership, I want to know more about self-leadership. Tell us a little bit more. What is it, and how can any leader who's listening to the show can use self-leadership to propel their growth, them being a better version of themselves?
Okay, well, forgive me for spilling the beans, but, I live, breathe, talk, coach self-leadership, and I've written 2 books on the topic, so it's going to come out of me at some point. So if you remember my origin story, which you asked me about, and that curiosity, moving from a physiotherapist, studying traditional Chinese medicine, alternative medicine, psychology, neurolinguistic programming, this curiosity for me was about being the best version of myself and helping others. And in the late 90s, 98, 99, I coined the term self-leadership to describe this. In fact, I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine and who was also a speaker. And he said, what do you speak about? And I explained, it's about being the best version of yourself and helping other people. And he said, oh, self-leadership. And I thought at that point, okay, that's the term. It was 98, 99. And so I started speaking and writing on self-leadership, and nobody else was talking about it. I thought nobody else was talking about it, but it turned out that somebody had coined this in 1987. A guy called Charles Mance had written a book on self-leadership. And when I started writing about self-leadership, I was contacted by Dr. Anna Kazan, who had studied self-management under 2 people, Professor Neck and Horton in the US, and they had created a self-leadership instrument or measurement at that time. So it turns out I haven't invented it, but if you Google the term self-leadership, my name pretty much covers the first 2 pages of Google on this topic because of the volume of work I've done on this area. So that's my claim to fame right there. You see, if you've done it, it's not bragging, right? So the evidence is there, right? I'm not using hyperbole here. This is a statement of fact. Go Google, self-leadership and you'll find me. So what is self-leadership? So when Anna came to me and said, hey, I love what you're writing on self-leadership, and we were talking, and I discovered, she was a PhD. And I said, well, I'm writing this book. And she said, really? That's super interesting. I said, but I'm sort of struggling with the statistical part of it and the analysis. She said, that's my strength. And I said, great, let's write this book together. So as we started writing the book and looking at the previous literature, we had to come up with a definition. And our definition is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. Now, let me break that down for you. It is a practice. Taking a shower is a practice. You take a shower in the morning because you don't want to stink. Because if you don't take a shower for a couple of days, there is a consequence. If you don't intentionally influence your thinking, feeling, and actions for a couple of days, there are consequences. Your attitude is going to stink. So it is a practice. So here's an important point. I've been writing and speaking about self-leadership for 20 years plus. But does that mean I always practice self-leadership? I have my moments of losing the plot, getting upset about something. And my wife goes, don't you need to self-leadership yourself? So we all lose it. So
the spouses are always there to put you back on track, I believe, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's what spouses are for, right? A good one, right? So self-leadership is the practice of intentionally influencing. So what is an intention? An intention is a why. I'm choosing to influence my thinking and feeling because I have a why that I want to do that. And that why generally is to be the best version of myself. Now, the fact is that we can influence our thinking. Our thoughts are not who we are. We all have thoughts. We have good thoughts. We have bad thoughts. We have thoughts we hope nobody catches us thinking, right? But they are our thoughts. And what do we think about a situation or an opportunity or a challenge? We can frame and reframe that, and that's the practice of self-leadership. Feeling our emotions. Of course, we're emotional beings. Without our emotions, we would not exist. Our passions, our fears, that's what we are. But it comes down to execution towards an objective. So you can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. You need to be role modeling that you have an intention and you have an outcome. Otherwise, people won't follow you unless you force them to follow you, in which case you're a dictator or an autocrat. So, effective leaders have high self-leadership. And we see leadership failing when somebody loses their self-leadership, which is often why, somebody I might put up there as somebody to emulate will blow up. I mean, I used to use Tiger Woods as an example of a sportsman who embraced coaching, right? And then his life blew up, or he blew up his life by having a very public affair. And so his lack of self-leadership discounted his public leadership. And this is the challenge in leadership, is that we become visible.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, everything is under the microscope. And so if we're going to step up into a leadership position, and this is why many people fear the spotlight, is if I step up into a leadership position, they're going to look at all of me. And, I'm not perfect. So that opens up another discussion, is should leaders be perfect, or should they be work in progress?
Yes, I think I'm going to ask you that question because this is something that always in my personal life. So let me tell you a little bit about me as well here. So I'm the eldest in the family in my generation, and I'm the one who's broken many glass ceilings, many stereotypes in the generation, which has never thought about, moving from a small little town to go to a big city, and then, making your own life, and then deciding to choose the partner that not your family has chosen for you, but you chose it for yourself, then quitting the highly paid, cushy corporate job to starting entrepreneurship and so on and so forth. So therefore, all my cousins who are younger than me somehow made me like the perfect role model. And that, after a point, used to scare me to death because I knew that I wasn't perfect. And there they were expecting every time a perfect version of Srijata, which was just not possible. So, what do you think? How should leaders who are in such situation, this is a personal experience I gave, but in a professional settings, when they are being seen as the perfect version, how should they perform themselves? How should they conduct themselves? Should they really be striving for perfection or not? What is your thought on that?
I think this is a great discussion to have, and it's one that leaders fall into a trap. So we have a great reference from Hollywood. The first Spider-Man movie, Uncle Ben says to Peter Parker, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Responsibility, yes.
Right. I like to flip that. I like to spin it to, with great responsibility comes great power. So as we take ownership, that's when we have influence. Now, perfection really sabotages progress, right? Progress is always better than perfection. And in Silicon Valley, where I work with a lot of clients, progress over perfection, or bias for action, which is one of the Amazon's leadership principles, bias for action. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to make forwards, is important. So we need to be making progress. And I would recommend that leaders don't fall into the trance that they have to be perfect, or worse still, that they are perfect. That's narcissism and arrogance, which we're not into. Good leaders should be saying to their people, this is where I made a mistake. And this is what I learned from that mistake. By being transparent about that, you give other people permission to try and fail and learn from that and grow. And so the best leaders are not eschewing perfection. They're eschewing progress to be a better version. And that means take action, try something, mess it up, right? And that's agile thinking, right? In software development, get it out there, get a minimum viable product, get in the market, get some feedback, and then fix it. And that's the nature of life. So if people put you on a pedestal, it is a responsibility, because you've been an inspiration to your cousins, and I'm sure many people. And so we have to take on that responsibility and balance it out and say, the perfect version of me. Now, I just turned 60, and I'm enjoying the transition into a new decade. And I've received lots of complimentary things. People say, well, you've done well. You opened this podcast by complimenting me. But if I'm 60, this is version 6.0, right? There was a version 1.0, 2.0. If I look at version 2.0, me in my 20s, or version 3.0, even version 4.0, it's embarrassing. Sometimes people who haven't seen me for 10, 15 years and we reconnect, I'm almost like, I'm not the same person you remember back then, right? You can't almost want to say it, but of course they have to discover it for themselves. If you have to tell them, you haven't made the change. But I received some compliments from people saying, you're much calmer, you're much more centered, you're much more at peace. And I go, well, if I'm not a better version of myself at 60 than I was at 40, then I didn't learn anything, did I? So I think communicating that it is a journey, that I'm here because I made some terrible mistakes. But the difference is I utilize those experiences into learning. And I have developed a self-leadership assessment. It's a situational judgment test. So we have psychometrics for personality. Do you have higher or low openness to experience? Do you have high or low conscientiousness, extroversion, etc.? I have developed a situational judgment test for self-leadership. And where a lot of people don't score as high as they think they will is in this concept of utilization. And the test picks up when something goes wrong. Some people will just deny it, defend it, and that's obviously very low self-leadership. Some people, when something goes wrong, they'll reflect on it, they'll cogitate, they'll play it over and over in their mind forever, right? It went wrong, I made a mistake. But a self-leader will take the failure or whatever went wrong. They'll reflect on it. They will reframe it, and then they will execute the new behavior. That's the distinction. So I hope that's a takeaway for you and for your audience today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel good that I have not put myself in that trap of perfection, whether it is in the professional front, whether it is in the personal front. I have grown out of it. There was a certain time where I used to feel the need to be perfect at all times. But now I have opened up to my vulnerabilities, to my mistakes, which I've had in plenty. I've written a book on that called Setback Leadership, right? So it talks about all the kind of goof ups, big goof ups that I have made and many other leaders have made. Still, they have gone ahead and progressed in their lives and had exponential growth in their lives in that way. So great at that. Now, I know, Andrew, you do coach a lot of women leaders. I want to ask you here specifically for women leaders, because I see that even in India, for example, a lot of women leaders are facing challenges to grow, especially during the current situation, the current times. So what has been your experience? What are the things that you can pinpoint that that stops women from progressing? That's there at their own end. They can change it. Certain cases, certain things are not under your control. Certain things you cannot change, which are external, I would say external problems, or the external biases or external situations. What about the internal situation? Have you found them different from other leaders, or do they also have similar challenges? What has been your experience?
Okay. So firstly, obviously, I'm not a woman. Obviously, I'm a son of a mother.
But you are. I'm going to interrupt here. You are not a woman, but you are really, really empathetic towards women leaders, and I'll tell the audiences why in my next question. So here we go.
Okay, so yeah. Well, obviously, I'm a son of a mother. I'm a brother to sisters. I'm a father to daughters. My first experience as a physiotherapist in the UK, physiotherapy, when I graduated, was a female-dominated profession. So I was actually the minority gender. So I have never sort of developed the unconscious bias that I'm better than women. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm always sort of terrified of women. And the Chinese have an expression that a man who is afraid of his wife will become very wealthy. So, you know, but I say that because in the work that I do with women, so I'm on the external faculties of the Women in Leadership program with Dr. Tanvi Gautam in Singapore, and working with women around confidence and executive presence. And as I researched, what is the unique challenge that women have over men? And it is something we've already discussed: perfectionism. Right? Women tend to have higher levels of perfectionism than men, and so they won't advance unless they think they've got it perfect. And a lot of that is conditioning. Maybe it's just being a woman, you want to make it perfect. So we've already discussed that. That needs to be addressed. Let go of being perfect and look at progress. Then the issue, of course, is just thousands of years, women are seen as the homemakers, and women are seen as the support individuals, and women tend to be more empathetic. So in this current crisis, when things go pear-shaped, the women are bringing around the wagons, as you would say in the United States. They're making sure the family is okay. They're making sure everybody's fed. They're making sure, and so those become their highest values and priorities. So for women to be successful in the workplace doesn't value family. It should, but it doesn't as much as it should. So, women have this challenge that they're in an environment that doesn't value something as much as they value it. And that becomes, to your point, the glass ceiling. So if they address the perfectionism, they can say, I don't have to be the perfect mother and the perfect executive. I can be an okay mother, and my kids, if my kids aren't starving, they're not robbing the neighbor's house, they're doing their schoolwork, they're not getting A's, but they're getting B pluses. I'm actually doing okay. And so because my kids are going to have their own life anyway, they're going to have to do whatever they have to do. I don't have to be the perfect mother. I have to be a functional mother. I have to be a functional spouse, and I need to be good at what I do at work. And with all of those areas, accepting that, this is my life choice. I want to contribute at work. I want to contribute as a wife. I want to contribute as a mother, but I don't have to be perfect every single one of them. And if they can accept that, then they can let their voice roar and be confident to say, I have a contribution to make, because you're a whole bunch of men. You have no idea about family and nurturing, and you're missing the point, right? And you need to step back and look a bit more strategically and stop, being focused on your egos. And then we make a contribution. And when women do that, organizations thrive, because the evidence from most of the major, from Deloitte and KPMG and from PwC, all of their evaluations show that organizations with women in leadership do better. So find your voices, ladies, and roar and say, I'm not perfect, but I'm making progress.
Awesome. I'm not perfect, but I'm making progress. I think that should be an anthem for all women leaders out there. And with that, I want to get to the next question, and why I said that you are really empathetic towards women and you respect women a lot. That is because I know you have a policy as a speaker not to appear in an all men panel. You make sure there is a diverse representation in any panel that you appear. How did you come about doing that, and what's the reason behind it?
Well, it wasn't my idea, so I can't take credit for that. I have been a guest judge for something known as the Keynote Directory, which is a directory for women speakers. So, as part of, as I said, self-leadership is not just an idea, it's action. So if I have the idea that I want a more diverse and inclusive environment for my children to grow up into, for the world to be, I need to take action. And so I was approached by these women who said, look, women are not being equally represented in speaking. You're a past president of Asia Professional Speakers. You're an influencer. Would you take this pledge? And I went, you know what? This absolutely makes sense. If there's 4 guys on a panel and no women, and you're talking about the organization, I mean, it's as bad as, male politicians talking about female reproductive rights. I mean, if you don't have a uterus, you don't have an opinion, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that's going to upset a whole bunch of people listening to this. So that's my stand. So I was like, oh my God, that is such an obvious thing. There's something I can do. So if there's no woman, I will not appear. And if I'm asked to panel, I will give my seat up. Now, panels are fine. Keynotes, which, I get paid to speak on conferences, I've lost money because I said, do you have enough women speakers? And they go, no. I said, well, here's a couple of people you should think of. And so that's really hurt me where it matters. But I'm glad to see that there are enough places I can be paid to share my expertise. So I think the world's a better place when we have not just male, female, but a diversity of age, a diversity of perspective, because we need to create a safe environment for people to have different opinions, because then we can build a level of collaboration. If we shut voices down, then we're never going to get that. So that's my philosophy and stand on the planet. And gender, of course, it's a very visible thing. I get into trouble because even past photographs, my executive committee, when I was president of Asia Professional Speakers, we only had one woman on the executive committee and only one woman volunteered. And that's a separate point. It's hard to get the diversity if women won't volunteer. So that's another conversation. But there was a photograph taken, and that day, the woman on my executive committee wasn't there. And so there's this photo and there's all guys. And somebody attacked me for that and said, you say you're all about women, but there's all men. I'm like, out of context.
Right, absolutely. In fact, that reminds me, even in India Professional Speakers Association, we didn't have women until I joined as the membership chair in 2020. All of them were male, and then after I joined, there were a couple of other women who came. Now, in the current exco, we have our president is woman. I think even in Asia Professional Speakers, it's Dr. Tanvi Gautam who's the president, and even in PSCI, that is Professional Speakers Association India, the president is woman, and we have one more woman representing in the exco. So it's getting better, and I'm sure you will be happy to hear this, Andrew, regarding the Speakers Association. All the Speakers Association in the world is coming together to connect all the women speakers that are there in each of their associations, and it is run by Kathy Johnson from APSS to help them connect to each other and bring their voices forward.
Very good. The world needs to get to a place where we don't have quotas. So I just want to make this point. It should be the best speaker or the best coach for the job, and gender should not even enter into the equation. That's where we need to get to. In the meantime, we need to address previous stereotypes. And so we need this affirmative action now. I just caution of my concern is that it goes too far. So for me is firstly, who's the best speaker for the job, and then but then we just do a quick quality control check. Did we make sure? Now, what's interesting is in conferences, when they put out a call for speakers, if you talk to a conference organizer, they will tell you, and I've interviewed a number of them on this topic, they will tell you, they will get a 3 or 4 to 1 number of men applying than women applying. So, here again is the message. So we said it's progress over perfection. So if a woman is thinking, well, I have to be perfect to speak at this conference, forget it. Right? You have nothing to prove, only things to improve. And the only way you're going to improve is by getting out there. So please, ladies, if I'm giving up my seat, let's make sure that my seat is being taken by a competent woman who is, striving to be the best, that they're not just picking, a random token female off the street and who will do a terrible job, because that doesn't serve the female community. Right?
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
Ladies, if I'm doing my bit, you need to do your bit and step up and volunteer, as you've done, Srijata, in being a membership chair. You have to step up if you want to make the change. And then there are supporters like myself who are there and have got your back. So make sure you know that who your supporters are. Yes. So I'm sorry, I'm a bit passionate about that one, because I also don't want to see bad quality female speakers put on a platform because they're a female.
So true. I totally agree with you on that, Andrew. And I'm sure, in fact, I had the same fear that, okay, initially we were all about bringing in the balance, but in the process of bringing in the balance, it shouldn't get other way imbalanced, So it just doesn't serve anybody. So it got to be very, very consciously, carefully, and very sensitively done, so that's something that even I would like to do. So I want to move a little bit away from now self leadership, in the sense individual leadership. I want to talk about or rather ask you about organizations at large, right? We are talking about external challenges. How can organizations truly help leaders break through their glass ceilings, their stereotypes, and what should they do at a institutional level to make sure they are not stopping somebody just because of their gender or because of certain preconceived, non-serving notions?
Well, the simplest scientific response to that, the simplest evidence-based, is to have gender-neutral job applications. When the initial interview is happening, is put numbers, or pseudonyms or non-gender specific names, and look at the applications, non-gender orientated. use an AI to do the initial evaluation so the most competent people get through to the final interview, and then it's a surprise to the interviewers what gender they are. Because women and even ethnicities are being pre-screened because just their name on the job application screams, this is the gender, this is where they're from. And if somebody has an unconscious bias, and they will deny that, look, I'm going to tell you a story where I don't look very good in the story. And it's a fun story, I think, because a few years ago, I was in France on holiday, and it was Bastille Day, so all the patisseries were closed. And I went to the train station with my family. I was about to travel back from Nantes to Paris, Paris to Istanbul to back to Singapore. And I'm at the train station and I buy a baguette on Bastille Day, which means it was made the day before. Now, if you've ever bit into a day-old baguette, you know it's a bad idea. I bite into this day-old baguette and I broke my tooth.
Uh-oh.
Right? Now, this is Saturday in France. On a holiday. There's nothing I can do there. I've got a train to catch. I'm going to arrive in Singapore at 8:30 on Sunday night. At 10 o'clock on Monday morning, I'm jumping on a plane to fly to Vietnam. I'm talking to 400 company directors, and I look like a country bumpkin. So I call my secretary in Singapore and I said, your mission is to find me a dentist, whatever it costs. She did her job, and I touched down in Singapore at 8:30. At 10:30 on Sunday night, I go into the dentist. And I sit in the waiting room at this dentist, and the guy's name was Mohammed Abdul Rashid. Now, I've lived in Asia a long time. I have no problem around anybody's ethnicity, their faith, but something, I don't know. There wasn't really an anxiety. I was happy to see the dentist, but here's the interesting thing. The dentist comes out. Sure enough, he's originally from Pakistan, except he has a London accent. His family moved from Pakistan to the United Kingdom when he was a kid. He grew up in England. He was educated in England, and he had a London accent. I'm originally from London. And so the sudden relief or familiarity that I had with his accent, and I recognized, my brain is saying he's like me. Whereas when I'd seen his name, I thought he was different. Not that I had a problem with him being Muslim, not that I had a problem with him being black, but I had a relief that he was closer to me. And that is a bias. That is an unconscious bias.
It is.
And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I felt better that he had a London accent. It made no difference to his dentistry. And there it was. And I'm thinking, if I'm an advocate for diversity and inclusion, and I had that thought, it's everywhere. So anyway, he was a great dentist. He fixed my tooth at midnight. I had a new tooth. I flew off the next day, and I did my speech in Vietnam, and nobody knew I had a broken tooth. I came back and he did a whole bunch of work and straightened my top teeth. So, my shiny smile today is due to a dentist in Singapore, Mohammed Abdul Rashid, and he's a great dentist in Toa Payoh in Singapore if you need a good dentist. But here's the thing. So companies need to recognize that bias is there. Name, gender, right? So get rid of that to start with in the interview process. And secondly, stop thinking about it as quota. Just asking the question, have we spread the net wide enough to consider gender and ethnicity? Have we actually got the best person for the job? Or did we just get somebody from another Ivy League college because that's where we get all of our people from? Right? So
absolutely.
That's the big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson out here. I mean, I speak to a lot of leaders and they have the same challenge that, one you were talking about, they get 10 applications against one woman, 10 men and one woman. So like that kind of skewed application. So there is the lesson for women leaders out there to speak up, to stand up, to show up at every place. They don't have to be perfect. And for organizations, what can you do to remove these biases in the selection process?
This is something I think
I mean,
a brilliant take.
there's a follow-up piece, that comes after that. Once you have hired women, make it a psychological safe environment, right? There should be no penalty that if a woman gets a phone call that her kid's sick at school and she needs to go take some time out. Now, one of the things that's positive around the pandemic and working from home is all of that stuff is invisible, right? Providing you've got a virtual background and you're not seeing the kids playing in the background, right? I mean, I've got this, I'm in this white void space here for you today, right? So, but yeah, there used to be a massive bias. The woman needed to go home at some point and feed the kids, where men might stay late. Making all company network, a boozy, a trip to a nightclub with strippers. That is not an appropriate, psychologically safe environment. Now, thankfully, a lot of that kind of behavior has gone. It still exists, right? The only company outing is golf, a boozy golf day. So having more, gender neutral environments for the networking is very important. Otherwise, what happens, and what Kathy is pushing, is that you get this subterranean female network. The men should be terrified of. I mean, one of the things I say to any male executive is, do not upset the personal assistant to the CEO, because generally that's a female, and if you upset her, your life will be, you just might as well move another company, because she'll make your life miserable. Because she knows everybody. She knows all the power levers, right? So yes, so psychological safety is the key thing, right? How do women speak up? Is it okay for women? And men have this tendency in meetings to steamroll their ideas, and making sure that just in meeting structure, that the purpose of the meeting, the reading for the meeting, is distributed before the meeting. Right? Meetings are terrible. And this is another hot thing for me. And I go off my deep end. So much time is wasted in meetings, because people need to come to the meeting with their ideas already preformed. Right? And then everybody, the Japanese have a great way of dealing with inclusive decision-making. It takes a long time, but what they do is that they start going around the room with the most junior people sharing their ideas first, and the most senior people sharing their ideas later, right? Because if you start with the most senior person, then nobody else is going to have an opinion, because that's not safe. We call that HIPPO, which is highest paid opinion, or highest paid person's opinion, right? And the highest paid person's opinion isn't necessarily the best opinion. So making sure that women need to learn to interject and say, hey, I have an opinion. I need to share something, or can I share something? So women need to learn to step up, and men need to make sure that they're doing a quality control check, that they're not talking over the top of people.
Makes a lot of sense there, and I think I like the idea of going from the junior most person to share their ideas to the senior most person. That way you are actually allowing everyone to share their thoughts without getting threatened, without feeling the need to conform because it's the leader talking. I think that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to share that with a lot of my coaches who I'm coaching in terms of leadership. That's a brilliant one. Last but not the least, we are almost at the fag end of the interview now, and I have just one last question here. So what do you think, in your opinion, leaders who are going through challenges, stereotypes at this point in time, glass ceilings, or different kinds of setbacks that are holding them back, should do? Maybe a top 3 things that they can do to quickly come out of these challenges, these traps, and start towards or walking towards growth.
So are you asking for somebody who's established, who wants to destroy the glass ceiling in their organization, or somebody who is climbing the ladder and facing the glass ceiling? Who am I speaking to? Because it's different. It's different advice to whoever's there.
So let's talk about people who are already established, still finding problems in growing further in their journey of growth, and they want to destroy the glass ceilings for themselves and for their emerging leaders.
Okay. So let me quickly share an experience of a senior leader that I'm coaching, and he's a wonderful guy. leading a tech company, and he's all about diversity and inclusion. But he's a guy. And just like I had the unconscious bias with my tooth, he has unconscious bias and he's unconscious of it. And he says, I'm extremely pro-women. And I go, yeah, you hired a C-level woman, right? He said, yeah, I did. See, proof that I'm good blowing the glass ceiling. I said, but you then went out and did a media blitz and also said, isn't it great that we hired a woman? And he said, yeah, what's wrong with that? I said, you should have gone out and say, isn't it great that we hired the best person for the job? You made it about her gender instead of about her competency. And he's like,
Makes sense.
I don't get it. I didn't get it. He thought he was being an advocate for women. And in fact, he was going, look, we hired a woman. Aren't we clever? Aren't we wonderful? And that's virtue signaling. If he'd really blowed out the glass ceiling, it is gender is irrelevant in our organization. And in Silicon Valley really has problems. Google had huge issues around women. Satya, I can't think of his last name. CEO of Google, absolutely got lambasted, but he did some positive things around it. So here's the thing: is stop making it about gender. Absolutely, make sure you're getting the best. You're making sure that women are equally represented, but then celebrate them for their competency, not for their gender. So that would be from that side. I think that's a reframe that a lot of people don't get. For somebody climbing is those mantras that I talked already about. It's just reinforce that. Is I have nothing to prove, only things to improve. This I have nothing to prove, self-esteem, self-confidence, it stops women being reactive. So a lot of the senior women that I coach. In fact, I had a coaching session last night with a C-suite woman who had just had a fight with her CEO. And he said, look, I want this done. And she said, well, I don't think it's a good idea. And he'd already invested in something. And so his ego was on the line and he shouted and she got upset. And so I'm coaching her around, well, look, you got to understand where he's coming from. He's actually fearful because he now has to report to the board. And you didn't, balance that out, and you've made it about your methodology versus somebody else. You set the conflict up, and now you feel that resistance. You need to step back. You're a C-level executive now. You need to make it about what's best for the organization. It's not about your methodology or his methodology. You need to transcend that, and it's about the organization. You have become reactive and defensive. The moment you become defensive, you lose credibility. So this is hard stuff because as women, you have generally a greater empathy and sympathy. And so you can be more sensitive when people raise their voices. If my wife is very sensitive, if I get passionate about something and raise my voice, she will go, I'm not having this conversation because you've raised your voice. I'm like, right? So we have this saying in our house, smell the flower, blow the candle, smell the flower, then we speak, right? So here's the thing. On the one side, if you're a male in a leadership position, stop making it about gender, but make sure gender is represented. If you are a female, don't stop being a female, but notice how you're being triggered and make it about the issue and not about who you are. That's the best summary I can give in a 30-minute, 40-minute podcast. If you need more, hire me. If you need more, I'm sure you'll give how to find Andrew Bryant in the comment section, and then hire me as your consultant because hey, I've got a wife and family to feed.
You're too funny, Andrew, and I'm sure. I would advocate this completely. That if you're really looking at making a huge progress in your leadership and you are a C-suite leader, Andrew is your man. Please look after him. He is amazing. He's just amazing in what he does, and he lives by whatever he talks about. I can totally vouch for it, Andrew, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted you to be coming in this podcast in this season for this particular topic. I could have called you for any other topic around setback leadership and all other things, but this made the best sense, which I felt that you should be participating in it, and you came. Thank you so much for that. And I mean I can be going on and on and on, say how grateful I am about it, but I think I'll leave it at that and just say thank you so much for coming and sharing all your thoughts.
Thank you.
You have been an amazing guest. I had so much fun interviewing you today, Andrew.
Likewise.
All right. See you some other time. And please, whoever is listening to this podcast, you must find Andrew, check out his work, and please work with him if you need to make a difference in your organization. With that, see you. Bye-bye. Ha, 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 ha. Why am I laughing like this? Well, today's episode was one of the most humorous episodes of all of these episodes that we are doing on Setback Leadership podcast. And why not? Andrew was on his best self there. He was just living the example of a self-leader. My learning from today has been very interesting. And because it is the day of Dashera and the day of triumph of good over evil, the learnings go like this. Instead of focusing on perfectionism, go for progress as a leader. That will help you. As a women leader, you must stand up, show up, and speak up. That's you winning over your evils that is stopping you from your growth. And on an organization level, can you get rid of the job application genderization? And also make sure that the unconscious bias around gender, around names, around ethnicity is taken away from all the job applications that you are creating. So, let me ask you today, what has been your learning from today's episode? And second of all, what evil are you getting rid of from your organization, from your professional life, and from your personal life today? Answer these things in the comments. I'm all ears. Last but not the least, do you want to know more about self-leadership? Then you need to check out Andrew's profile, which is given below in the description box. And should you want to find out more about what is setback leadership, what kind of setbacks are stopping from you growing freely and exponentially, read my book on Amazon. Till the next episode, I will see you. Stay safe, stay content, stay happy.